At 9:47 a.m. on March 31st, 1943, Second Lieutenant Owen Baggett's world exploded into fire and noise. His B-24 Liberator, Dragon's Breath, shuddered under the impact of 13mm cannon shells. One moment, the young co-pilot was scanning the Burmese sky near Pinmana. The next, he was fighting a blizzard of plexiglass shards and the acrid stench of burning metal and fuel. The Japanese K-43 Oscars of the 64th Sentai, having climbed silently from their flanking bases, had found the formation of 12 B-24s. They struck with terrifying precision. A fuel tank in the left wing was ripped open, and a trail of vapor ignited into a roaring inferno that raced along the wing route toward the fuselage. First Lieutenant Lloyd Jensen, the pilot, wrestled with controls growing sloppy as hydraulic lines bled out, his face a mask of concentration and dread. Behind them, in the cacophony of screams, gunfire, and tearing metal, the crew fought for their lives. The intercom spat static and died, severing the vital link between the men. Baggett, his ears ringing, turned to see the frantic eyes of the waist gunners. Without a voice, he raised his hands, signaling the only order left: prepare to abandon ship. The battle had lasted less than a minute, and they were already losing it. In the belly of the bomber, 19-year-old Sergeant Samuel Crosstick ignored the chaos. Standing on a narrow catwalk over the open bomb bay, with nothing but a terrifying drop below, he faced a different enemy. Flames, fed by shattered oxygen bottles, licked at the bomb bay doors and threatened to detonate their remaining payload. He emptied one, then a second fire extinguisher into the heart of the blaze, the white chemical cloud hissing uselessly against the raging fuel fire. The heat was unbearable, warping the metal around him. He looked up, catching Baggett's gaze from the flight deck. The co-pilot's hand signals were unmistakable and final. Bail out, now. It was a death sentence for the aircraft, but their only hope. Jensen, seeing the fight was lost, gave the order. One by one, the crew began the terrifying scramble to the hatches. Baggett counted 4 parachutes blossoming in the slipstream below, 4 chances against the odds. Then, a sudden, violent silence as the flames reached something critical. The B-24, mortally wounded, tore itself apart in a final blinding cataclysm of light and force that hurled Baggett into the cold, thin air. As he tumbled, the world a dizzying spin of blue sky and green jungle, his last sight of Dragon's Breath was a comet's tail of smoke and debris. But the sudden quiet was deceptive. As his parachute deployed with a jarring snap, the high-pitched whine of diving fighters returned, slicing through the air. The Oscars weren't finished. They were coming back, not for the bombers, but for the men now dangling helplessly beneath the silk. The metallic whine turned into a throaty roar as the lead Oscar, its red Hinomaru glaring against the pale blue, leveled its wings and dove. But its guns weren't aimed at the fleeing bombers. Tracers, bright and lethal, stitched a line through the sky directly toward the drifting parachutes. Baggett watched in frozen horror as the fabric of a canopy 100 yards away erupted into shreds. The airman, Sergeant Connolly, their radio operator, jerked violently as rounds tore through him before his body went limp, a marionette with cut strings, beginning a horrifying, slow tumble toward the jungle canopy below. A second Oscar banked steeply, its pilot lining up another shot. This was no dogfight. It was an execution. Intelligence briefings had spoken of this Japanese tactic, preventing rescue, instilling terror, but the clinical description evaporated in the face of its brutal reality. Baggett felt a searing hot punch against his left arm, followed by a numbness, then a warm, relentless soak of blood spreading through his flight suit. The same burst that wounded him severed his parachute's lift web, and his descent became a faster, unstable spiral. The wind screamed in his ears, mixing with the fading engine noise of the departing fighters. Or were they all departing? Through a haze of pain and shock, he counted the Oscars reforming. But one remained, circling him like a shark drawn to the scent of blood. Baggett's mind, trained for emergencies, but never for this, raced. He was a wounded man dangling under a damaged chute, an impossible target. To move was to declare he was alive. A desperate, macabre idea took hold. He forced his body to go completely slack, letting his head loll forward onto his chest, his arms dangling at unnatural angles. He became a thing, not a man. Through barely slitted eyelids, blurred by tears of wind and pain, he tracked the lone fighter. The Oscar, painted in a mottled green camouflage, completed its wide circle and then did something unexpected. Instead of a strafing pass, it slowed, its nose rising as the pilot masterfully trimmed it into a near stall. It was coming alongside him, so close Baggett could see the oil streaks on the cowling and the faint reflection in the curved windscreen. The pilot was inspecting his work. Baggett held his breath, every muscle screaming to flinch. He saw the pilot's helmeted head turn, studying the bloodied, motionless American. For a long, agonizing second, they were suspended together in the sky, predator and presumed prey. Then the pilot did the unthinkable. With a faint hydraulic whir, the fighter's canopy slid back. The rush of air buffeted the open cockpit, and the pilot, one hand on the stick, leaned out slightly, his eyes narrowed, searching for any flicker of life. He was making sure. In that exposed moment, the hunter had made himself vulnerable. Time compressed into a single crystalline point. The Oscar hung suspended, its propeller a lazy blur, engine gasping as it flirted with a stall. Baggett could see the pilot's face now, young, focused, his brow furrowed not in anger but in clinical assessment. 20 feet of empty air separated them, a distance Baggett had trained to judge with bomb sights, not a sidearm. The blood-soaked sleeve of his flight suit was a dead weight, but his right arm, pinned against his leg since the chaotic exit, was free. His fingers found the familiar checkered grip of his government-issue Colt M1911, a heavy, crude instrument of last resort. It was never meant for this. The pistol felt alien as he drew it, the movement a screaming betrayal of his corpse-like pose. The Japanese pilot's eyes, previously scanning, snapped wide with pure, uncomprehending shock. In that frozen microsecond, the hunter saw the quarry armed. Baggett didn't aim in the conventional sense. He pointed his entire being. Ignoring the screaming pain in his left arm, he steadied his right against his thigh and squeezed the trigger. The report was a flat, shocking crack in the vast sky. He fired again and again, 4 times in less than 2 seconds, the pistol bucking violently in his hand, spent brass cartridges tumbling away into the void. He saw sparks flash on the Oscar's cockpit combing near the pilot's head. The fighter seemed to flinch. Its nose, already high, dropped abruptly as if in a nod. The engine's ragged cough turned into a final sickening wheeze. The sleek aircraft lost all pretense of flight, its left wing dropping violently as it fell out of the sky beside him. It began to spin, a leaf in a tempest, dropping away with terrifying speed. Baggett watched, transfixed, as it corkscrewed down through thousands of feet, a diminishing speck of metal, until a distant, soundless bloom of smoke and a faint tremor marked its meeting with the jungle. There was no time for triumph. The ground was rushing up. Baggett hit the world with a colossal, drowning impact, driving him to his knees in the thick, sucking mud of a flooded rice paddy. Icy water, 18 inches deep, swallowed him to the waist. Gasping, he fought the tangled shroud lines of his parachute, the white silk collapsing around him like a death shroud. He fumbled for his holster, his numb hands pulling the Colt free. He checked the cylinder. 3 rounds left. The metallic click was a sobering sound. He looked up, scanning. 2 other parachutes were descending perhaps half a mile to the west, Jensen and maybe Crossstick. But then, movement at the tree line. Not American. Figures in ragged clothes carrying long rifles were emerging from the green wall of the jungle. They were pointing, not at the distant chutes, but directly at him. The Burmese militiamen, their faces impassive, waded through the murky water with practiced ease. Their rifles, British Lee Enfields likely captured at the fall of Singapore, were leveled at Baggett's chest. One gestured sharply at the Colt, still clutched in his hand. The message was clear. Baggett opened his fingers, letting the heavy pistol sink into the mud with a final sucking gasp. Rough hands hauled him onto firmer ground, binding his wrists with coarse rice rope that bit into his skin. The column began a silent march east. Within minutes, First Lieutenant Jensen, limping badly, and Sergeant Crosstick, his face blackened by smoke, were shoved into line beside him. No words were exchanged. A shared, hollow look said everything. 3 survivors, 5 men lost. Their march ended at a sparse Japanese garrison outside Pinmana, a collection of bamboo huts buzzing with disciplined activity. The interrogation began immediately in a stifling room smelling of mildew and disinfectant. A Japanese officer, polished and coldly polite, demanded names, ranks, units, targets. Baggett, his voice cracked, repeated only his name, rank, and serial number. The officer's smile vanished. A backhanded strike from the guard snapped Baggett's head to the side, the metallic taste of blood filling his mouth. The questions came again, faster, sharper. Baggett gave the same 3 answers. The cycle repeated until he was dragged away, not to a cell, but to a bamboo cage barely large enough to sit in, an open-air coffin exposed to the blistering sun. Days blurred into a haze of thirst, delirium, and the distant thunder of artillery to the north. On the 3rd day, the guards pulled him out, along with Jensen and another captured American flyer. They were taken, not to a truck, but to the garrison commander's office. Behind a simple wooden desk sat a Japanese major general, his uniform immaculate, his demeanor unnervingly calm. He was known to prisoners later as a man of particular cruelty, destined to the gallows as a war criminal. He studied Baggett for a long minute, his gaze lingering on the blood-stained flight suit and the defiant set of the young co-pilot's jaw. Then, through an interpreter, he spoke not of threats, but of honor. He explained the principle of seppuku, the warrior's escape from disgrace. He detailed the ritual with chilling precision and, to the stunned horror of the prisoners, produced a sheathed tonto, a ceremonial short blade, placing it on the desk between them. The offer was stark and, in his twisted worldview, respectful. Die by your own hand now rather than face the certain degradation and slow death of a prisoner. He saw in Baggett not a foe to be broken, but a warrior who had performed an impossible feat. Baggett, his body screaming in pain but his spirit unbroken, met the general's gaze and gave a single, clear refusal. The general showed no anger, only a slow, acknowledging nod, and dismissed them. As Baggett was led back to the darkness of his cage, the weight of the encounter settled upon him. The blade was not just an offer, it was a confirmation. The Japanese High Command knew. They knew about the Oscar, its fate, and the man in the parachute who had defied all odds. His act had made him not just a prisoner, but a marked man. The transfer to the Changi area camp in Singapore was a descent into a new circle of hell. Packed into a ship's sweltering hold with 50 other men, the air thick with the stench of vomit and despair, Baggett watched 2 prisoners die before they even sighted land. The new camp was a masterpiece of degradation. Bamboo huts swarming with lice, a daily ration of a handful of maggot-ridden rice and watery soup, and a brutal, sun-scorched work detail hauling coral stone for Japanese anti-aircraft emplacements. The once proud co-pilot was reduced to a skeletal automaton. His weight plummeted from 180 to 110 pounds. His ribs stood out like a washboard. Berry swelled his legs with painful edema, and scurvy loosened his teeth. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of hunger, thirst, and the casual, bone-breaking violence of the guards. Hope was a rationed commodity, more scarce than food. It was in this state of near oblivion in late November 1943 that a flicker of life returned with the arrival of a new prisoner. The man, though haggard, carried an undeniable authority. He was Colonel Harry Melton, commander of a P-51 Mustang fighter group shot down over Burma just days before. During a furtive moment in the exercise yard, shielded by other prisoners, Melton recognized Baggett. "Your name came up," Melton whispered, his eyes sharp. "At my interrogation. The Japanese are still talking about it." Melton's story cut through Baggett's fog of malnutrition like a bolt of lightning. A Japanese colonel interrogating the captured American fighter ace had steered the conversation away from tactics and into what seemed like battlefield folklore. With a mix of professional outrage and grudging respect, the colonel described an incident from March 31st. A B-24 crewman, hanging defenseless in his parachute, had fired a pistol at an attacking Ki-43. The Oscar had crashed. The Japanese recovery team, the colonel emphasized, found the pilot's body clear of the wreck. He did not die from impact trauma. The cause of death was a single .45 caliber bullet wound to the head. The pilot was dead before his aircraft even began its final spiral. Melton, understanding the monumental significance, had vowed to file an official report to confirm Baggett's incredible shot once he was freed. For Baggett, it was a cathartic shock, an external, enemy-sourced validation of a moment he had begun to doubt himself, a memory that felt like a hallucination born of pain and terror. This was the proof he needed. But history had other, crueler plans. Melton, along with dozens of other prisoners, was loaded onto a Japanese transport ship bound for the home islands. On December 17, 1943, the USS Sea Lion intercepted the unmarked vessel in the South China Sea. 3 torpedoes struck home, sending the ship and almost all aboard, including Colonel Melton and his crucial testimony, to the bottom. The only official report on Baggett's incredible shot now rested at the bottom of the ocean, and the sole living witness who could corroborate the Japanese account was once again alone with his story. The year 1944 bled into 1945 as a continuous gray nightmare. Baggett existed as a ghost of a man, his weight bottoming out at a skeletal 90 pounds. His legs, swollen grotesquely from beriberi, could barely support him. Jensen and others became his crutches, helping him to the latrine and back in a humiliating parade of decay. Death was a constant neighbor. Men died from dysentery, starvation, or a guard's casual rifle butt to the head. The only glimmers of hope were violent. The distant, thunderous rumble of American B-29 superfortresses bombing Singapore's docks at night. Baggett would lie on the floor of his hut, feeling the concussions through the earth, watching the sky flash orange through the bamboo slats. Each blast was a promise of Allied might, but also a terrifying gamble if the Japanese followed through on their whispered threats to execute all prisoners before an invasion. The guards' behavior shifted with the war's tide. Their once certain brutality was now laced with a nervous, unpredictable anxiety. News trickled in through stolen whispers. Germany had surrendered. Okinawa fell. The guards spoke of honorable death for the prisoners in the jungle. Then, in August, a profound unease swept through the camp. The Japanese were visibly shaken, gathering in hushed, urgent groups. A guard, his face ashen, spat out words Baggett barely comprehended. A single bomb had destroyed a city called Hiroshima. Another followed on Nagasaki. The world had changed in an instant, and the prison walls, for the first time, felt fragile. On August 15th, the guards simply stopped. They stood listlessly at their posts. Then, by ones and twos, they walked away, leaving the camp gates ominously ajar. No shots were fired, no final orders given. For days, the emaciated prisoners remained inside, paralyzed by disbelief. Was it a trick? a pretext to massacre anyone who tried to escape? They survived too long on Japanese rules to trust their sudden absence. Then on September 21st, the sky delivered salvation. At dawn, the distinct sound of Allied aircraft grew loud, and 8 figures parachuted directly into the compound. They were not soldiers in conventional uniforms, but operatives of the American Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. Their arrival was a surreal spectacle of efficiency and care in the heart of the death camp. They brought medicine, canned food, and the undeniable authority of liberation. As Baggett, barely able to stand, received his first proper medical assessment, the OSS men documented the horrors. The twist of his long-awaited freedom was laced with a final cruel hurdle. The medical report listed him among the 38 men too weak to survive immediate evacuation. His body, after enduring so much, now threatened to fail him just as rescue arrived. He was forced to wait, receiving emergency treatment in the very camp that had almost killed him, before he could finally be carried onto a C-47 Skytrain at Singapore's Kallang Airport. As the transport plane climbed over the jungle that had been his prison for 917 days, Owen Baggett was finally free, but he carried with him a story etched in pain and a truth that felt more fragile than ever. The sanitized corridors of the Army Hospital in Calcutta were a universe away from the bamboo cages of Singapore, but for Owen Baggett, the war was not over. His body, a roadmap of scars and vitamin deficiencies, began a slow mend under the care of military doctors. Yet his mind remained in the sky over Pinmanah and the filth of the prison camps. The official debriefing process was a new kind of ordeal. Seated across from clean-shaven Army Air Force intelligence officers in a sterile room, Baggett methodically recounted everything: locations, guard descriptions, interrogation techniques. The officers nodded, taking meticulous notes for future war crimes tribunals. Then he reached the climax of his personal war: the stalled Oscar, the opened canopy, the 4 shots from his Colt. The rhythm of the questioning stuttered. The officers exchanged a glance. They asked him to start that part again. Then the questions came, sharp and precise: exact distance, angle of the aircraft, number of rounds fired, confirmed site of the crash. Baggett answered with the same clarity he used to describe guard rotations, but he sensed a shift in the room. Their professional courtesy remained, but it was now layered with a palpable, unspoken skepticism. They were not hostile. They were archivists of chaos, trained to sift fact from the fog of war, and his story was a singularity that defied all classification. He had no witnesses. Jensen had been too far, Crostick already on the ground. Melton was dead, his crucial second-hand account lost to the sea. There was no gun camera footage, no wreckage report from Allied forces, no bullet-scarred parachute canopy to examine. His extraordinary claim stood alone, supported only by his word and the unwavering certainty in his own memory. The report was filed with a bureaucratic neutrality that felt like a verdict. It documented Lieutenant Baggett's statement without endorsement, a curious anecdote appended to the dry facts of his capture and imprisonment. The folder, stamped confidential, was placed in a filing cabinet at Headquarters, Army Air Forces, where it began its slow descent into obscurity, buried beneath thousands of other more conventional debriefings. Baggett returned to the United States in early 1946, processing through the Presidio of San Francisco. He was medically cleared for continued service, his body having regained a semblance of health, though the nightmares and a deep-seated flinch at sudden noises remained his permanent companions. Choosing to stay in the military, he transitioned smoothly into the new United States Air Force. He proved to be a competent, steady officer, flying supply missions during the Berlin airlift, serving in staff roles during Korea, earning quiet promotions. The twist of his post-war life was not drama, but its utter absence. The man who had performed one of the war's most improbable acts became the model of a peacetime officer, his legend known only to a few close friends and family.
When the story did slip out, often over a mess hall dinner, it was met with polite smiles and a change of subject. The unspoken consensus was clear. It was a good war story, the kind a man might craft to make sense of his trauma and survival. Baggett, steadfast in his truth, but weary of the doubt, stopped offering it. The memory of the young Japanese pilot's shocked face and the spinning Oscar became a private relic, locked away with his dog tags, its authenticity guarded only by his own, increasingly lonely conviction.
The story might have remained a private family legend, were it not for the relentless curiosity of historians. In July 1996, more than half a century after the events over Pinmana, Air Force magazine published a meticulously researched article titled Valor, David and Goliath. The author had not only interviewed aging veterans of the 7th Bomb Group, but had also cross-referenced mission logs and critically examined surviving Japanese records from the 64th Sentai. The analysis was forensic. No Allied fighters were in the area that day to claim the Oscar. The K-43's stall characteristics made the close approach not just possible, but tactically logical for an inspection. A .45 caliber round was absolutely lethal at point-blank range. The article addressed the lack of direct evidence head-on, concluding that the convergence of circumstantial evidence, the second-hand account from Melton noted in other prisoners' debriefs, and the sheer tactical logic left no reasonable doubt about the truth of Baggett's account. For Owen J. Baggett, then a 76-year-old retiree in New Braunfels, Texas, the article was a profound vindication. The phone began to ring. Historians, documentary producers, and a new generation of aviation enthusiasts sought out the soft-spoken old man. He patiently answered their questions, his humility intact, still marveling at the astronomical odds of that moment. 4 shots, 1 falling aircraft. For 53 years, I wondered. Owen J. Baggett died on July 27, 2006, at the age of 85. His obituary in the local paper listed his career, his family, and his quiet community service, but it also carried a single extraordinary line. He was believed to be the only airman in history to have shot down an enemy aircraft with a handgun while parachuting. The legacy of his act is etched not just in memory, but in cold, stamped steel. The Colt M1911 .45 caliber pistol he carried, John Browning's masterpiece, remained standard issue for U.S. military aviators for decades. Tens of thousands of pilots carried it as a tool of last resort, but only once in the entirety of the war did the confluence of desperation, skill, and improbable circumstance conspire to use it as it was used on March 31, 1943. Baggett's story is more than a singular tale of survival. It is a testament to the Burma theater, a brutal, forgotten campaign where men of the 7th Bomb Group faced impossible odds over featureless jungle, suffering catastrophic losses with little of the glory afforded their comrades in Europe. His improbable victory symbolizes their collective resilience. The final unexpected twist is not one of drama, but of quiet, historical resonance. It challenges our understanding of what is possible in combat, reminding us that history is not just made by grand strategies, but also by individuals in split-second decisions, their stories waiting, sometimes for a lifetime, to be believed.